Well, hi everybody. I'm just making some videos now to start putting the windscreen back together in the frame, which I think is going to be a bit tricky. It's very humid here and warm. You can probably hear the sound of crickets in the background. But what I have here is the windscreen frame, which I hope you can see in the picture, and that is held together. I think I pointed this out last time in the last video. That is held together by these little angle brackets here, which have two screws there and two screws in the bottom. I hope that shows up underneath there, and it's the same for the top. So I've decided that what I'm going to do is put the angle brackets fitted onto that and then put this onto the glass with the seal, which I'll talk about in a second. Now I did have a couple of problems with the angle brackets. I think I mentioned in a previous video that I had bought a kit from AH Spares, and these are the top brackets that came with that kit and a set of screws. Wasn't very expensive, and as you can see, it's pre-drilled. I hope that shows up. The problem is that those holes are very, very slightly out of position, which means that the mitering on the edge of the screen doesn't quite lock together, which from my eye looks a little bit unsightly. So I actually resorted to using the old ones of these, which I'd kept and still had. So that's a bit unfortunate, and I guess it's probably a bit much to expect that a piece could be reproduced and fit perfectly. The screw holes weren't very far out, probably about millimetre and a half or so, but enough to make a difference. So that was a bit of a problem with those. Maybe to be expected, I don't know. Some people wouldn't tolerate it. I just think that it's part of getting new parts to fit old parts, and it's always going to be a problem. So I have the frame, which, as I say, has been replated. Now, in the bottom of the frame is this, inside the channel that the glass sits on, is this piece of rubber. I guess this is a bit of a spacer to keep the glass off the bottom of the frame, I suppose, and perhaps to stop it hitting on the screws at the edge. This is the original piece that was in the frame when I took it to pieces. And it's slightly perished, but for what it is, I think it'll be fine. It's just a strip of rubber that's probably about 3/8 of an inch wide and about 1/8 of an inch thick, I reckon. And that sits in the bottom of the frame. The other thing I have here is, this is the actual windscreen seal, which is in the form of a strip, probably about 1.5 inches wide and quite thin. 1/16 of an inch thin. Hard to work in inches. We're used to metric over here. I would have said about 2 millimeters thick, which is about 80 thou, roughly, whatever that is in inches. So that fits inside the frame, and then the screen drops down on top of that. Now, I've never had a lot of luck. I think I mentioned this in a previous video. I've never had a huge amount of luck with these, but this one's quite thin. And when I measure the windscreen itself, it's also a little bit thinner than the old one. So I'm hoping that I can get that all together without any breakages. If I do break it, I guess you're going to see it. So that's the next step anyway, is to try and get this fitted together. I'll probably do it over the course of the next few days or so, but it could be interesting for anybody who is doing this sort of thing. One other thing I should just show you as well is that I have this seal here. This is the seal that runs along the bottom of the screen and makes a seal against the body. So there's a little T-shaped piece there. You can probably see the profile of that, and that slides in underneath the screen, and I believe they're quite hard to fit, so we'll see how we go with that. So that's the plan for this evening and possibly for the next few days, and we'll see how we go with it. Well, this is quite difficult to hold, of course, so I've just fitted it into an ordinary timber vise very gently with some cloth so we don't damage it. And the first thing is to lay in this strip here of rubber. You can buy these. As I say, this is the original, but they are available, and really any sort of strip of rubber will do. So we just sort of push that down. Now I know I probably look like I know what I'm doing, but I actually haven't got a clue because I've never done this before. So there we go. Okay, so let's sort of make sure that's down all the way down onto the base. Very nice fit, and that's that. The next thing is I have to try and fit this piece of rubber in. That's probably a little bit more tricky. So I'm going to see if I can do that by just sort of folding it and dropping it in place roughly in the middle. I guess the idea is that once the screen is fitted, we trim off the excess with a very sharp blade. So that just pushes in there. I may have to get some soap and water. I'm sort of half expecting to do that. It depends really how tight the windscreen is, and I don't know whether to try and push the screen into this or whether to push this onto the screen. And I probably really need another pair of hands, but I do spend most of my time doing this stuff by myself. So we'll push that down as far as we can. Looks like I've still got a little bit of trimming there to do. I made it slightly longer, but you get the idea anyway. And that actually fits in there quite nicely. And the screen should drop into that, all being well. Well, I've repositioned this a little bit in this vise. I'm going to try now and see if I can get the screen in. Now I don't have any lubricant of any sort on that, so I'll see how I go without the lubricant, although I suspect it's probably a good idea to use some. So we'll see what happens, and of course it would be really nice if I didn't break anything. Now that sort of fits in there reasonably well. I can push it down a bit now. I'm not sure how far it's in, that's the problem. So I'm going to take this out now and put it around that way. I don't really want to use any hammers or anything on it. So I'm going to just gently, I'm not sure, I think it appears to be fairly square. We'll just try and push that down. It won't come down very far anyway because of the rubber in there. So that's that one. And it's actually, appears as though it's in. The temptation is to get a rubber mallet and do some tapping along here, but I'm not totally convinced that that's a good idea. When it's all screwed up, I guess it holds it in place. These don't need to be really tight on there, I suppose, because the screws, the frame itself, will hold everything in. I might try and put the sides on next. We'll see what happens with that. But I think that's sort of in as far as it will go. And I'm not going to trim anything off until I've finished. I might have said that, I don't know. I repeat myself sometime, right? Well, let's see how we go with this. So here is the end section, and again I've put the little rubber strip inside there, and then this is, as you can see, the edging. Now again, I don't know whether I'm going to have to use any soapy water. I think if you have a problem, a bit of soapy water would be really good. The first piece seemed to go on okay, so we'll see how we go with this. Now of course you've got to make sure you get these the right way around. This is the front left hand side, and this screws onto the windscreen stanchion, so it fits on that side, so we should be okay. Let's see what happens
with
That's
this.
actually gone together quite well. The mortise, the little angle there, mortise, the mitre there in the corner will pull up a little bit, hopefully, when I screw in the little screws. But that went in all right. I might put the screws in and see how that pulls up. Well, that's the bottom and the two sides fitted in. I must say, it actually went together fairly easily. It was a very nice fit, almost bordering on being slightly loose, but it seems to have gone together very well. And these angles here, as you can see, these little mitres are very neat. I had to adjust those brackets quite a little bit with the angles to get those mitres right, but they're pretty good. And I'll trim all this off afterwards. I still have to put the top rail on. I'm going to hold off on that because for the top rail, as I said, I used the original little angle brackets, and they need a coat of paint before I put them in. So I'll do that. But you can see there are the little screws holding those together. They're very small and they're not Phillips head or crosshead, so they can tend to scuff a little bit when we do them up, but that's okay. So I think that's going to be it for tonight, and I'm pretty pleased with my efforts on that because I thought it would be more difficult than it has turned out to be. And here is the finished product, and I'm sorry I didn't show it all as I was doing it, but it's pretty self-explanatory, and I'm also a bit limited, of course, for the length of the film on YouTube. So here it is. Haven't been cleaned up yet. I did end up having to use some of the non-hardening sealer because when I put the rubber in, it was just a little bit loose, and I felt that it just needed something to tighten it up, so I used some sealer. It's held in the side there, as you probably know, by those 4 screws along there. So really, once it's in the frame, it's just a matter of putting those screws in and bolting it up. Now, this seal here can cause a few problems. I'm told that actually went in quite easily. It just slides in underneath the frame. And I used a product called Hydra Slip, which is a bit like a Vaseline, and just sort of smeared a bit of that over there, and that really went in without too much trouble. Trimmed it up here to go underneath. I'm not quite sure that that's quite right, and I may have to have another go at that, and you can see there's a little nick in there, so we might try and get that underneath, but it's I think it's all sealing up quite well, and I don't intend to take the car out in a deluge anyway. Now these fit in here, of course, just bolted in. There are 2 bolts, nuts and bolts there, and then the stanchion is threaded up a bit higher, and there is a bolt that runs through from the inside and is threaded into that part of the stanchion. And then of course there's the little crosshead screw in the top which goes through, and there's a nut underneath that. Some cars I think might have a shim here between this stanchion and the body. Mine didn't when I took it apart, and I was a little bit concerned when I put it all back together that it might crack. Hasn't yet. If I come out in the morning and it has, then I know why. But look, that's pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with it. It wasn't terribly difficult to do, just a little fiddly. And one thing that occurs to me is that I want to run a little bit of white vinyl around there, and I've got a screw in there that's going to be a little bit tricky to get out with the windscreen in place. Might have to make up a special little screw head tool for that. Anyway, there it is. Another bit of a milestone, and really looking pretty good. I'm just going to wait for all the sealant to clean up, to cure properly before I clean that windscreen up and polish up the frame. But I'm pretty pleased with that. In fact, I'm very pleased with it. It's a good milestone.